I mean, I think there was going to be something worked out, but I'm not sure like it was in the same role or how they would structure it. You know, it seemed like if Mozeliak wasn't going to stay in baseball, it would be in some fashion with the Cardinals. But what that would look like or how much of a direct day-to-day role he would have in leading them, I think that was something that they did discuss. I know it was something that they did discuss. It was on his mind. He brought it up today at the press conference, like what else would there, what other projects, what other options, what other maybe businesses far afield from baseball would he want to look into? You know, so that was at least on the mind. So I'm not, I'm not a surprise that he stuck with the Cardinals, but, I don't think it was a given that he remained in his same role. And, even in his description today, it's clear that over time, especially during this contract, he wants that role to change.
And I was going to ask you that next, so it's good timing. Yeah, when he's talking about how the Cardinals have to kind of, Bill DeWitt needs to start to try to think about, transfer of power, so to speak, in a transition to what's going to happen next. Are we to read into that he's probably, meaning Mo, he's probably going to want to move on after 2025?
Yeah, I mean, at least he wants them to be positioned for that to happen. The way he described it was, kind of growing responsibilities. He said some of this stuff before, and then, to be fair, they kind of had, 2020 happen. And you started to see some things shifting with the front office, but then Mozeliak took a really prominent role to get that team through the short season that also involved, their whole quarantine. I mean, he was with the team on that first road trip and then, just directed logistics from there and has continued to, in part because of some of the things that they were trying to do, like a Nolan Arenado trade, for example. But, he's talked about wanting to, about respecting his staff's eagerness to grow. There have been members of the staff that have been approached by other teams. They've turned down those interviews, or they've gone through the interviews and not gotten the job. But, Randy Flores, Moises Rodriguez, those two guys stand out. Michael Gersh, obviously the general manager. These are guys who are at least in the conversation around baseball for, are they going to lead a team sometime, or, and they don't, or does that have to be the Cardinals, right? Like, are they committed to the Cardinals? And I think, Mozeliak wants to respect, or I know he does, he wants to respect those guys spreading their wings, so to speak, if I can use the pun.
I think you can. It was well done, actually. You nailed it. Derrick Goold with us from spring training, Jupiter. Do you think – all right, I'm trying to figure out just a smart way to phrase this, so I apologize for hesitating. The overall body of work that Mozeliak has had is very impressive. I was saying and writing today that, I hope by the time this latest extension is through, he can figure out a way to go out on top. Do you think that we know they're capable of doing that? In other words, improving their postseason performance by at least giving themselves a better chance to go far. But do you think that they will alter their model enough to make that happen, or at least make it a stronger possibility to happen?
Sure. It's a great question, and it's one that, it'd be great if they gave a straighter answer to, because I've asked so many times. They are very fond of their model, right? Mm-hmm. And the question that I had today, and I'm still trying to explore a little bit, was this notion that, how much of that model is leveraged on innovation that allows them to compete above their market size, right? And if you're in a game where your draft edge that you used to have has been tightened, other teams draft like you now. I mean, Randy Flores has had run some very successful drafts, and he might have Yossi from the 2020 draft, which is unbelievable, right? That they would get all those picks to the majors. That's possible, right? Right. I mean, that's remarkable. If not, then the first group of them will, And Jordan Walker, who was atop that list, is going to be, is one of the top prospects in baseball and could be a real impact talent for this club like they haven't had in a long time. So maybe since Matt Carpenter, right? So
right.
I think, when you think about it in those terms, other teams are smarter than they were. Other teams paid attention to the draft models and draft success of the Cardinals and the Astros and the Oakland Athletics and these other teams that were doing really well. And they closed that gap. And the Cardinals didn't create another one. At the same time, just baseball in general, infrastructure, number of coaches, technology, spaces, facilities, all of this has just gotten so much more expensive. The competitive salaries that coaches demand, it was not for the Cardinals. They had one of the highest priced pitching coaches for the last few years in Mike Maddox, because if they didn't pay him one of the highest salaries for a coach in baseball, they wouldn't have had him, right? So all these things are growing, and so it's like we pay a lot of attention to the money spent on players, as we should. But the question that I continue to kind of go back to is if they have to invest, and they do, to regain or even catch up in some of this infrastructure stuff, then how do they do that as a mid-market team with their model? I'm just not sure, right? I'm not sure how they do that. And so that to me suggests that they got to change.
And that's a good answer. I mean, I've said this to other guests who say, I'm not sure. That's an honest answer, which I prefer, because it's complicated. It defies a simple answer. So I appreciate everything you said there. I want to switch gears and ask you this and give you credit. I remember.
I can give you a quicker. Hey,
sure,
Bernie, I can give you one quick answer to that, though. Their view of how they spend on pitching has to change.
Yeah, I totally.
They have been very much risk management oriented, reluctant to go longer term, high dollar deals, with the exception of maybe the offer they made to David Price, or if you want to talk about Adam Wainwright. The market is telling them they need to change when it comes to pitchers.
I think everyone who heard that and who reads you would say with 100% approval, that's correct. Yeah, no doubt about it. And I don't know if they will. And that's the thing. I don't know if they will. So that's unfortunate because they're so close. I wanted to ask you this, and I do it with the knowledge that last year you were the first to tell us, meaning me and meaning people who listen, to be on the lookout for, Andre Pallante. Be on the lookout for him. He's got a chance to be really good. The Cardinals love him. And you were right. And I know you mentioned a couple other people that still are very much on their radar. But I wanted to ask you, I don't know if I'm going to use the term surprise, but who are some guys that fans should be monitoring maybe a little more closely than some other young players? In other words, a chance to be a surprise the way Pallante was to the public at large last spring.
Yeah, I think Connor Thomas is one lefty who had a really strong turn in the Arizona Fall League. My colleague Daniel Guerrero has written a lot about him and the cutter that he just really didn't have. So if you look at his AAA numbers, you're like, wait, why is this guy one that they rushed to protect? Why is he in Major League camp, and why is Derrick bringing him up? Well, he wasn't operating with the pitch that he now has, and that's given him a completely different look from the left side. Really befuddles hitters. It gets swings and misses. It's a plus pitch, and you and I both. And Pallante is an example of a guy who has a wicked good pitch, the one pitch that then gets him a job in the majors. Connor Thomas has that look. Gordon Graceffo has power, real power that he and control. Power and control plays well. I think Joaquin Rodriguez is going to be a guy who either is quickly going back to the Yankees or is going to make the bullpen and could be a fire-breathing dragon out there. He throws 100 miles an hour, sorted things out as a closer for the Mexican team last year, was somebody the Cardinals were trying to sign in June to see if they could take off or maybe have him get maybe and times the bullpen all goes through. Just a guy. He has some major league experience. Was a Rule 5 pick that the Cardinals came back from or grabbed from the Yankees. So he's got the edge. He's got the edge when it comes to staying on the roster. That means I think he's very interesting and is a guy who will likely announce his presence with authority, if you will, and could stick around for a while. Then you have Moises Gomez, who set the club record, the all-time record for home runs by a minor leaguer. He was fun to watch hit today. He does not get cheated. He hits the ball quite hard. It was BP, so you always saw him make contact, but he hits the ball hard. I'm eager to see what Oscar Mercado, now back in the Cardinals fold, brings too. Last year Brian DeLuzio had a spot on the roster, right, as a backup center fielder and a speedster. Well, that's Oscar Mercado. So is there a similar spot for him this year, or is that going to be squeezed out by their look to some of these other young hitters who everybody knows, the Yepes, Burlesons, Walkers of the world?
Yeah, and it is an interesting spring training with so many guys gone to the WBC, and I am curious to see what. Well, of course Walker, but I'm glad you brought up Gomez. I'm curious to see what he can do with a more open, more meaningful opportunity to where more eyes will be on him. Do they think that they can get him to reduce his strikeouts and his swings and misses? Is that possible, or do they think it's possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that actually was a topic that the coaches were kicking around the other day in their internal meetings, was how to progress his spring to make the advancements that would include that. And also, to be honest, there's part of it that, like, well, look, man, he's a power guy. There's going to come with swings and misses. So how much of that do you just stomach because of the power you're going to get, right? So, I think that's on their mind. They have a progression of, it would be drills, right? Okay, so here's the cage work and live BP work that he's going to get before kind of launching into, games, or I guess, live BP would be kind of that part of that step too, where, all right, get your swing, get your consistency, get your work in the cage, get this drilled in, get this going. And they have the time in spring to not have him rush then into competition and pitchers. And I think that's something to watch. I don't think that delays him greatly. I mean, it may not even delay him at all. It may be in that first game, but it certainly will kind of influence and shape his early workouts here.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and I know you got work to do, so I don't want to keep you too long. I know we'll have a lot more to talk about once things get underway, but I'm looking forward to it's going to be a busy camp, as you guys have written about a lot. And with new coaches and young players getting an extensive opportunity, there's some positions to sort out. So there's going to be a lot going on. And at least you'll have no shortage of topics, right?
Yeah, no shortage of topics, which is good because on the web we have no shortage of space, right? So that works out.
That's a good way to put it, I guess. That's a really good way to put it.
We'll type as much and as fast as we can until our keyboards give out.
That could happen. You better have a laptop repaired.
Yes.
Yeah, no. Better have a laptop. Better have a laptop. Do you have a favorite laptop repair shop down there in the Jupiter area?
I call it DIY. So I'm good. I'll take care of it.
Well, thanks a lot, Derrick, and we'll talk next week. Yeah,
sounds good, Bernie. Have a great week. Have a great evening.
I will. Thank you very much. That is our friend Derrick Goold. And the number one thing, in that answer about the DeWitt Mozeliak model has been very, very, very good for a long time, but they're coming up short in the postseason because they have not really addressed one thing that needs to be addressed, which is, if you can't develop a number one starter on your own, or a number 1A starter, which is a guy that technically might be the second guy in your rotation, but he's actually better than that. If you can't develop that pitching within, or if you're going to continue talk yourself into the fact that, hey, this guy's a top of the rotation guy. Well, actually, based on their 5 starters going into spring training, they don't have a top of the rotation guy, but they've convinced themselves, or they're fooling themselves in pretending that they do. So if you can't develop a number 1 and a number 1A caliber starter by drafting and developing, or signing out of the international pool, you have to stop pretending that you actually have that caliber of pitcher, starting pitcher, and you need to spend it. So if you can't develop it, you must spend for it. And they are incredibly stubborn about being in denial on that topic, on that area. And I got a lot of respect the way they do their business, because it's worked for so long. And people think it's so easy. And it's not. It just isn't. It's there's only been 7, like the last 4 years, Cardinals are like one of 6 teams in the majors that made the postseason all 4 years. And it's like, I can hear it now. I won't do the voices, just out of respect to the one guy that texted in. But I can hear some of the response to that in my head, which is, well, Bernie, you know that it's easy to make the playoffs. It's no big deal. It's good for them. It doesn't change the fact that the Cardinals have been a massively disappointment in the postseason. But where I break off from some of you, and I've said this a bunch of times, I do not view making the playoffs as kind of like a, well, so what type of matter. I think first of all, it's an obvious first step. If you want to do anything in the postseason, you got to get there. Number 2, and this is what I wanted to share with you, making the postseason, even in these expanded format times we live in, is not as easy as many assume. So, again, the Cardinals have made it 4 years in a row. They haven't done much with their chance once they got there, but they've made it 4 years in a row. They're only one of 6. There's only 5 other teams that have done that. But if you look at the number of major league teams that have made it 2 times or less over the last 4 years, some with none, some with 1, some with 2 appearances in the postseason, 23 of the 30 teams have failed to make the playoffs more than twice over the 4-year period. So, I mean, I always hear, and listen, I've said this myself, well, it's a lot easier to get in the playoffs. It is easier, but it's not easy. Because if it was that easy, then why haven't more teams done it more than 1 or 2 times over the last 4 seasons? You know what I mean? That's a lot of teams that sort of they're at best every other year on average. They're getting every other year over a 4-year period on average. They've made the playoffs. So I don't know. I think it's a little harder than we assume or we like to pretend. So I just wanted to pass that along. And yeah, I know it isn't like 1967 or 1964. 64 being referenced to the St. Louis Cardinals, who came from way back to finish first. No, that's it. You win your league and you're in the World Series. There's no other way in. That's pretty tough right there. Or the 1967 American League race, which was a famous race. I mean, 4 teams had a chance to win the American League going into the final weekend, and the Red Sox did. And then, of course, they lost to the Cardinals. But the days where only one team from each league made it, and they go right to the World Series. I mean, that was kind of cool, but obviously that ain't never going to come back. And it's easier now compared to then. And before the wild card area, of course it's easier. But if it was all that simple to do, no problem, you'd have more than 7 teams over the last 4 years make it more than twice. So I don't know. It's just my view, something to think about. But no doubt they got to make some changes to make themselves more viable for when they get into the postseason. We all agree with that. Some of it has to do, however, and this is where I again, I might branch off from some of you. The players have to perform. You know, I don't know. You know, when Goldie and Arenado and even Pujols, you know, had very, very quiet wild card rounds against the Phillies. Yeah, you have other people in your lineup that can get things done. It doesn't fall on your 3 best hitters or most dangerous hitters, but it's not the front office. Like, in other words, if you build your whole team around most of your team, this like based on the success of 2 of the top 3 players according to MVP votes in the league last season, you know, if they don't hit, I kind of pull back and say, well, I don't know that I should be ripping Bill DeWitt for that, or John Mozeliak. The answer to that would be, well, yeah, but they've got to have more good hitters so they have something to fall back on. Well, that's true, and a lot of that depends on health as well. So they got to stop with this injury stuff. I mean, at some point this team's got to have a pretty healthy season. Maybe it's this year. Anyway, I just wanted to get a little some of that stuff off of my mind.